In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Now, I said at the beginning of the service that I want to talk about racism, and in the light of the three readings which don't appear immediately to be racist. But all three readings, there are racist undertones going on, and all three readings give us hope that there is a way out of this. So I'm not going to be sort of just spreading doom and gloom. So let's take the third one, because this is perhaps the least obvious of the racism. It says that Jesus got into a boat to cross over to the other side, and then he has this miraculous keeping of the storm and all the rest of it. It's what happens on the other side where the inherent racism occurs, because Jesus is going across the Sea of Galilee to what is now Jordan. And in Jesus' day, it was an area called the Decapolis, and it was definitely not Israelite. And the people who meet him there are very suspicious of who Jesus is. And then there's this fellow who comes who's got a health problem which Jesus heals. Now, underneath all that is the tension, the racial tension between Jesus as a Jew and the people on that side who are not. And at the end of the story, when he's healed this person, they ask him to leave because they're afraid of him. And that's one of the signs of racial division, is fear of the other. And what Jesus does is he breaks down that barrier by healing somebody that they couldn't heal. This was a person who had a long-standing medical problem, and Jesus basically overcomes those racial boundaries by healing one person. And that's really what we do now. When we interact with people who are different from us, it can be a bit fearful. But when we meet at a human level where there is human need for healing, and that healing can be physical, spiritual, emotional, whatever, it doesn't really matter. Healing is healing. When healing takes place, the racial barriers go down as well. So that's the third reading, and it's the least obvious one, so that's why I wanted to take that one first. The second reading, as we've been hearing, is Paul writing to the Corinthians. Now, Corinth is in Greece. Paul was born and bred in southwest Turkey. And this is not this is a well-known fact that there's been tension between Greece and Turkey and their predecessors for over 3,000 years, all back to Helen of Troy and probably beyond that as well. And so when Paul walks into Corinth and Athens and all the other places, there is racial tension, because these rather well-to-do, middle-class, posh-ish type Corinthians are thinking, yeah, who's this guy? He's a foreigner. Now, let me just tell you how ingrained this is. We're used to the word barbarians. And that was the word that the Greeks used for anybody who lived east of the Adriatic. Anybody from Turkey and beyond was a barbarian, and it's a word that is mimicking speech they cannot understand. Yeah, anybody who goes ba 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 ba, we don't understand it. This is racism. So how does Paul overcome this? Well, he has to appeal to the Corinthians' better nature, saying, look, it's just me. The thing I boast about are my weaknesses. So yes, I am this person who's not pretty to look at and not a very good orator. But that's not what Christ is about. Christ is about that uniting of all humanity. And it's my weakness, my stuttery speech or whatever it is, all the other problems he had, It's those weaknesses and those blemishes that make that clear. Because if Christ can do that with me, and look at me, I'm a sort of, this Turkish fellow who's of no use in Corinth at all, what can he do with everybody else? And so Paul's strategy is to deprecate himself so that Christ may be glorified. So that's the second reading. And now I want to come to the first reading, because this is the most exciting and the solution is the most interesting. So it's the story of David and Goliath. It's a phrase that we use. We use it in football and we use it in all sorts of situations where the little guy gets one over on the big guy. And we do know that these Philistines were very big, because we've found their mortal remains and they are extraordinarily tall. And the Israelites were quite small. Now, first of all, it's warfare. Okay, this is 11th century warfare, and warfare, as we know, creates racial tension. I mean, you've only got to watch that episode of Fawlty Towers where they keep saying "Don't mention the war" because of the German couple who are there in the staying in Fawlty Towers, and that's a hangover from the Second World War, of course, and it's the same in ancient Israel. The Philistines were the people during David's day which were the big enemy. They had destroyed the national temple at Shiloh. We heard about that a couple of weeks ago. So there was no love lost between the Israelites and the Philistines. But who were the Philistines? Well, in order to find that out, you have to go right back to Genesis chapter 10, with a chapter there that's a list of names, and it's called the Table of the Nations, and it tells you where the Philistines came from, and it's Cyprus. So you have the Caphtorim and the Philistines who are together. Now, that's important because we need to remember what happens to David. David becomes this great army commander under King Saul, but then when King Saul gets a bit jealous of David, David ends up fleeing to the Philistines. Now, they're a bit suspicious because, again, racial tension, but in the end, by a bit of duplicity, David ingratiates himself with the lords of the Philistines. This all comes to a head when the Philistines muster everything they've got to go into battle against the Israelites, and David nearly ends up fighting with them, but they don't quite trust him enough, and so they say, no, he's not coming with us in case he tries to get back with King Saul by turning on us. So David's not involved in that battle. The battle goes against Saul. The Philistines win. It's a disaster militarily for the Israelites. But that death of Saul leads to David becoming king again, or not again, but to take place of Saul. And then we have the building up of David's kingdom, first in Judah. He reigns in Hebron, and then they take Jerusalem, and then the northern tribes of Israel come to him as well. And that's cutting a long story short. But here's the interesting thing. David, once he's on the throne properly and he's sorted himself out, David has his own personal bodyguard. Now, many kings and ancient dictators have done this. The Romans had the Praetorian Guard, and these are the people who are ultra loyal to the person, and they're people that he would know personally. And David's bodyguard are referred to as the Kerethites and the Pelethites. Now, you'll have to take my word for this, but remember the Caphtorim and the Philistines? Well, the Kerethites and the Pelethites are the same people, and they are led by somebody who is a foreigner. So when David's son Absalom, many years later, tries to get a coup going, David flees from Jerusalem in order to stop Absalom from slaughtering everybody. And the Kerethites and the Pelethites go, well, we'll go with you. And David says to them, well, hang on, you're not even Israelites. This has nothing to do with you. You haven't got to worry. You stay here. And they said, no, we're loyal to you. We're coming with you. So what this tells us is that David, in a very, very shrewd move, has removed racial tension between the Israelites and the Philistines. And as far as we can tell, apart from a little note in Second Book of Chronicles, apart from we can tell, there was no further hostility after David between the Israelites and the Philistines. He solved the problem by welcoming those people as his friends. And he's not the last person to do that. So how do we overcome racism? Well, first of all, we need to identify the subtle ways in which it exists. And I'm very pleased that the archbishops have acknowledged that racism is really ingrained in the Church of England, because without actually calling it out, we can't do something about it. But then there are these imaginative ways in which we can overcome it. Jesus did it by healing one person of the other race. Paul did it by going, okay, yeah, I'm this person that you think is really rubbish because of my race, but actually, look what Jesus did with me. So a bit of racial humility goes a very long way. And then the third way, which is David's way, is to say, these people who are my enemy are now my most loyal friends. That's three ways in which we can overcome racism in the church and in our country. I wonder what other ways you can think of. Amen.